Hey, Margaret,
Yeah, Anton?
you know what people don't talk about enough?
What?
The fact that at the very top of the flashback to Wilhelm's scandalous fight, we hear a stranger shout at him, asking to take a picture. Welcome to People Don't Talk About Young Royals. I'm Anton. My pronouns are he, they.
I'm Margaret. My pronouns are they, them.
And we're people here to discuss the show our friends are sick of hearing us talk about.
If that sounds like you, stick around. If your friend sent you this podcast out of a desperate attempt to get you to watch Young Royals, take this as a sign.
Go watch Young Royals, then come back to this podcast.
Anton, what are we talking about today?
Today, we will be having a character discussion of Wilhelm in Season 1, Episode 1, having decided we have no choice but to stand.
As a disclaimer, in this discussion, we won't be summarizing the plot of this episode, because we already did that. If you need or want a refresher, head back 5 episodes in our feed to our most recent This Week at Hilarska for a full breakdown. This episode discussion will likely be all over the place, so strap in. You've been warned.
Alrighty. I didn't totally intend it this way, but it's a happy accident that the detail I chose for the cold open is actually like the first thing in my notes, pretty much.
Nice.
But before we actually get into our discussion proper, as the first episode in this episode type, character standing, a little explanation for our listeners. As much as possible, in these character episodes, in any episodes relating to one character, we'll try not to repeat ourselves with discussions that we've had previously. I think these will be interesting, specifically the ones that we are recording now for the pilot, because most of the episodes we're recording for the pilot are being recorded in a vacuum. We have no idea what you guys have thought of the six main episodes and one bonus episode that came before this one. So we don't really know what we're gonna what we have failed to cover in those episodes. Hopefully character episodes will be a place where we can talk about things that people remind us that we forgot. But we're gonna try our best. And also, as episodes explicitly about our own personal feelings, these will probably be way more head empty, no thoughts than usual. Because you can't, as much as I've spent my entire English major trying, sometimes you just can't describe a feeling. So, let us try to articulate the best we can in this episode why we've chosen to stan Wilhelm in the first episode of Season 1. And that begins with, "Can I take a picture, please?" Which is what someone off stage, presumably from their voice, they sound AFAB, but I'm not about to assume the pronouns of someone we don't even visually see. And I don't want to veer us in this discussion too close to our eventual episode about the royal family. But I do want to say that in terms of setting up a character and why we should care about them, moments like this really begin the process of getting us to empathize with Wilhelm less than a minute into the episode. He has so much pressure on him that I think no one could be totally fine with. Thoughts on that opening scene, Margaret?
Yeah, I think... So he's so young, he's 16. He has the same level of, fame isn't the right word, but, people recognize him to the same level, especially people his age recognize him to the same level as they would, a musician or, that type of thing. And he's just, at a club with, I'm presuming, his friends from public school.
Yeah. And
he, doesn't ever get to turn it off.
Definitely.
He always has to be Prince Wilhelm of Sweden.
Yeah. I mean, this is sort of a strong saying, but from a podcast that I listen to, that's kind of a more about like social issues and past historical events of the last 30 years. When addressing public celebrity figures who have had some sort of dramatic downfall, like what am I thinking? Like Tanya Harding as a kind of a stock example. Like not to directly compare Wilhelm to Tanya Harding, but like he's someone who's undergoing a scandal. And the thing about famous people undergoing scandals that this podcast kind of like uses as kind of its thesis for those sorts of episodes is that fame is abuse. That amount of the human brain is not calibrated for that level of attention.
No.
Yeah.
It's really not. That's so much pressure all the time. Especially, you're gonna make mistakes as a teenager. Like, that's just part of being a teenager. Like, it's almost a guarantee. But you don't get that liberty to make mistakes when the entire country is watching, and if you mess up as badly as the fight ends up being, I guess we don't know the, like, scale of, like, if anybody outside of Sweden hears about this.
Right.
But I'm assuming you probably, at least in neighboring countries or something, maybe it got out, but at least everybody in the country has seen this.
Yeah. I think it feels like a little bit more of a Sweden thing, but like it doesn't necessarily feel like it's not just any sort of like international incident.
Yeah,
and like the Swedish prince going to boarding school, for after a scandal is not something that I think would make international headlines.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of what we would hear about the British royal family doing.
Right, but also at the same
and we
time,
hear a lot about the British royal family right now, so I guess my perception's a little skewed.
It is, and also that's the British royal family. Like I'll remind our listeners, for if you couldn't tell from our accents, we are American, and there's a certain kind of like mild obsession that a lot of the fair deal number of Americans have with the British royal family. But I didn't know the name of the current Swedish monarch until I had to look it up for a future podcast. So like,
yeah. As soon as we started recording this podcast, all of a sudden I kept getting videos about the like children of the Swedish monarch on my like Instagram like reels, and I was like, where the hell did this come from? It's like, how did they know?
Yeah. No, but I think to kind of emphasize the point, immediately you are in a position where even if you can't imagine what Wilhelm is going through, like it's somehow incredibly easy to relate to. And the moment I've kind of pointed to for that is Stop That, when the Queen like pulls his hand away when he's biting his nails before the interview.
Yes.
I wrote down "our little anxious boy," and then proceeded to say, quote, "Willa is me for real, so says every anxious queer on the glorious tumblr.com."
Can we be real honest? My mom does that to me because I've ripped my nails.
Yeah.
And my mom does that, like, stop, and like grabs my hand.
Yeah.
And so when I saw that for the first time, I was like, somebody else does it.
Right. Like it's so obviously to anyone watching an anxious like habit that he can't break, especially since, I mean, maybe it's not immediately clear in this episode, but maybe it should be. He's not in therapy. And so this is untreated, probably generalized anxiety, like,
yeah,
on a pretty severe degree.
Yes.
So like a lot of this probably comes down to Edvin's acting, but Lisa's writing gives him so much to work with, to really make Wilhelm feel so lived in and believably anxious. I think we've mentioned this at one or two other times, but like Wilhelm's anxiety is, I think, to a lot of people, and at least to me, what makes him the most relatable out of all of his traits.
Yes, I would agree with that 100%. It makes him very approachable.
Yeah.
Because very few people can relate to being a Swedish monarch or a Swedish child of the Swedish monarch.
Yeah.
But almost every adolescent young person in our generation can relate to being anxious.
Yeah. And I think I also don't want to minimize, I think. Not like we have been, but I just want to highlight, like I said, specifically every anxious queer on the glorious tumblr.com, because I think there's a unique anxiety to being queer.
Yes.
That I think maybe if it's not it's not a diagnosable thing, but even just correlationally, you have higher levels of anxiety among queer people, and it's really easy to get to that place, even if you're not queer. If we have some straight allies listening to this podcast, like how that could be the case. It's just stressful.
It is. It's like constantly having to like gauge your surroundings in a way that you wouldn't have to necessarily if you were cishet.
Yeah. And so we have this very relatable anxious character who has his first real smile. And
I love the smile.
Okay, regardless of the fact that this is a Wilhelm and Simon moment, I want to highlight how it's so impactful on an audience who has only known this character for I checked 10 minutes. Yeah. Any person with a heart who isn't homophobic as fuck wants this boy to be able to just live his life the way he wants to live it. I wholeheartedly believe that, even by the 10-minute mark.
Yeah. I'm with you. I'm right there with you.
Like, it is that degree of joy on a person who has been miserable for the last 10 minutes of screen time.
Yeah, and it's like he's not just smiling either. It's like pure joy.
Yeah.
It's not just like, oh, like I'm doing this like polite, like his entire face is lit up. And like that's the moment for me where I was like, if anything happens to this boy, I swear to God, I'm going to throw hands.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I need him to be happy.
One of the reactors I've watched the most, and I believe potentially because he's one of the ones I watched for the longest, he might be one of the first people whose Sing Royals reactions I saw. He has this habit of any time, especially when there's younger characters who are younger than him on a show that he's watching, he'll immediately claim them as his children. And so like the quickness with which he's like, that's my son, is just like we are in the interesting spot of kind of being between the actor Edvin's ages and the actor Omar's ages in terms of like how we are. So like we're a bit distant from Wilhelm's age, but like I don't like we're definitely not old enough to really claim him as any sort of claim this.
No,
as
we're
a
like
sort of
5 years older
thing.
than Wilhelm.
Yeah, it's not any sort of parental thing for us, but I think it's still like a protective thing, like you said. Like I would throw hands.
Yeah.
And as the episode goes on, we kind of start realizing that like what we've seen up to the 10-minute mark is only the tip of the iceberg of what this boy is actually feeling on the inside. His like the pain on like I can't do this for 3 fucking years to Eric.
Mm-hmm.
And then afterwards the hallway shot.
Can we just talk about how lost he is?
Yeah.
Like he's supposed to be, because everybody's like, oh, you're among people who are like you now. And so he's supposed to be in a place where he can be comfortable and be himself in a place he knows how to navigate. But he's so lost.
Yeah. I think that hallway shot is kind of all you need to get that. Like, I think there's a difference between before that you can be like, oh, he just doesn't want to be here. But then it's like, no, he doesn't want to be here. Like, he shouldn't be here. It's bad like for him.
Yes.
And like you just see the reality of what being a Hiller is going to mean getting to him. And he's just left alone by his parents and his brother. Because
yeah, that's the thing too, is it's not just like, oh, I'm going to school. It's like, no, you're being sent away.
Yeah. Yeah, we've mentioned that distinction before, but I think it's very important to highlight in terms of like, we don't highlight it. Again, I think a kind of a theme of these episodes about the pilot is that there are things that you just don't think about moving forward in the show because they happen in the pilot. But like thinking of Villa as like being someone who was basically just like, who was shipped off to boarding school and like abandoned there.
Yeah.
Like,
and it's not like boarding school was like 20 minutes away. You could go home on the weekend. We looked it up. What was it? Like a 2-hour drive?
Yes. About there. Yep.
It's a 2-hour drive from Stockholm.
Yeah.
Like, that's not nothing, you know?
Yeah. Like as context, and not to disclose too much about our location, but like that is the distance between my hometown and where we go to college.
Yeah.
And like I chose that distance in part because I thought it was a comfortable distance where you could go home. Like it would be kind of an ordeal, but it's possible, but also far enough away that there is a like distinct separation between you and where you've been your entire life.
Yeah.
I basically just said like you want to reach through the screen and give him a hug in that hallway scene. And we're what, 12 minutes in the episode? And I think as a slight detour from sad Wilhelm, I want to talk about crafty Wilhelm.
You want to talk about what, Wilhelm?
Crafty Wilhelm.
Oh, I thought you said crappy. I was like, when was he crappy?
No. No, I want to talk about crafty Wilhelm because...
Okay.
Or I guess maybe use a term I think I've used in a previous episode, calculated Wilhelm. Because his little game that he plays with Henry and Walter, that we've talked about so many times because I find it so fascinating, of voicing an opinion he doesn't have to see whether or not they're going to agree with him or not. Like, as audience members, this is the first time I think we really see that side of him. And, like, to an extent, the lengths that he goes to in order to feel like he can survive social situations as the prince.
Yeah.
Like, he needs to know what level of trustworthiness the people he's talking to are. And I think that little test is a great one in terms of deciding the level of attachment he's going to have in this relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the way he does it, it's like the only time he has confidence throughout the entire show. Or the entire, not the show, but the entire episode.
Yeah.
It's like the only time he looks sure in what he's going to say.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is that I even didn't fully recognize it as deliberate until we started this podcast and started talking about it, partly because I think it's deceptive, but also like deceptively genius, the way that Edvin kind of just decides to not show the decision on Wilhelm's face to do this test, which kind of just shows how natural it is.
Yeah.
And like also potentially the ways in which that Wilhelm is kind of so like exhausted that he's incapable of conveying sarcasm.
Yeah.
When he intends it.
Yeah. That too. And I think there's like an emotional exhaustion that he has.
Yeah.
Throughout this entire episode. Because he's been through a lot in the last... I guess we don't know exactly.
Yeah, we don't know between the interview and...
a few days.
Yeah, we don't know we don't know between the interview and when he starts in Halerska. But I would assume it's not very long because the year has already started.
Right. I would assume it's only like a couple of days.
Yeah.
Or like maybe he starts that Monday or something.
Especially considering something like that is kind of a running thing that we haven't really talked about at all yet is the fact that his cut is still on his face from the fight.
Yes.
And like that is barely healed over at all, which I think is a good indication of the time.
Yeah. And it's still like not bruised, but like it's like the mark, not only just the cut, but just like the mark around it has not faded yet.
Definitely.
So it's not like they waited a week.
Right.
They probably only waited several days.
Yeah. And so like to the emotional exhaustion you're talking about, I think the moment that is most clear is when he is texting his mom in bed that he wants to go home.
Yes.
We've talked about this before, about the way that this is the first time we actually see how much this single day at Halershka has taken out of him.
Mm-hmm.
And like something that I want to highlight that I don't think I've said in this exact way, but I think it's true, is that this is a side of him that he wasn't showing to anybody, even when he was alone with Eric.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah,
he veered towards it in his like frustration and the way his voice would like get close to breaking and stuff like that when talking to Eric, but he never showed Eric the utter like desolation that he's feeling inside.
And I don't know that he would have shown it even alone if he wasn't so exhausted.
Yeah, like we get a glimpse of it alone in the hall when he's alone in the hallway, but this is his vulnerability fully on display here. And to kind of call back, I didn't write this in my notes, but to call back to something that we have argued on this podcast, and I think we'll continue to argue, there are no, if very few scenes where Wilhelm is actually not aware that the camera is on him.
Yep.
And this is a scene in which if he is aware, I know for a fact he just can't bring up the energy to care.
Yes, I would full-heartedly agree with that. I think he's probably aware, at least to some degree, but I agree. I don't think he has the energy or the time right now to give a damn during that scene.
Yeah. And he's looking at the press photos of himself that we see Felice looking at a bit earlier in the episode, or maybe later in the episode. I'm forgetting exactly where this falls in the sequence, but like, I always wonder what he is seeing when he's looking at those, because they're what prompt him to text his mom, or at least they come right before it. So it's kind of that becomes a question of.
Yeah, I mean, he probably sees right through the like very thin mask of the PR training, and so he probably is just like, God damn it, this is miserable.
Yeah.
I look miserable. This isn't fooling anybody. Yeah. Mom, can I come home?
Right. And I think as the audience, 14, 15, like, I don't even know, like halfway through the episode, not even, like, we can see through the mask already.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it helps we've had we're in a privileged position. Now, as of this scene, we are in a position that no one else has of seeing Wilhelm alone. Actually, from the very first scene, we have the privilege to see Wilhelm alone. In the bathroom when he's in front of the mirror. Like, we can see through it, and I think Wilhelm, I would agree, is in a position where he's like, how convincing can I possibly be?
Yeah. And I don't think he's fooling himself. I don't think he thinks he's being convincing.
No. And I know he's trying.
Yeah.
But there's only so much he can try.
Yes. I agree.
And okay, before we kind of get through what is probably the saddest part of this little character episode, I do want to emphasize that when he gets that immediate response from Queen Christina of being like, you'll feel better soon, I feel like that emphasizes how little control he has over the situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. he's got no control over it. And beyond that, he doesn't have... we're gonna talk about this more in the royal family episode, I know we are, but he doesn't have a parental figure. He has the head of state.
Yeah.
And the head of state who is trying to keep a good PR image.
Yeah, I think...
And is like...
Yeah. I think...
Yeah,
a way that I have heard in fiction, and I think in real life, like children who are kind of, especially in the entertainment in the entertainment industry, whose parents are their managers, they kind of refer to themselves as like, it's felt like I was a problem to be handled.
Yeah.
And like something to be damage controlled.
Yeah.
Instead of parented.
Yes. And I think, and I know that we're going to talk more about this in the royal family episode, but
yeah,
that is exactly what that interaction shows to me.
Yeah.
Along with the way that Christina speaks to him before he has to do his interview speech thing.
Yeah. Okay. I've kind of grouped together all of the remaining Wilhelm and Simon stuff because we discussed a lot of it already into one little like section here. Because I think, again, kind of focusing it through an audience perspective of like what the relationship to this character is. A lot of it informed by like what other conversations we've had and like how I think we relate to this character. We see this like awkwardness and confusion and joy in Wilhelm as his relationship with Simon builds throughout this episode. Like Simon, he isn't a reason to love Wilhelm because we were very clear to each other about these episodes. Like we can't bring in other people as the reason to like certain characters. They have to stand on their own.
Yep.
But Simon is also an opportunity to provide Wilhelm happiness, which I think is something by the point in the episode when they actually start interacting with each other is something that you as an audience member have a very vested interest in, or at least I do.
Yeah, and going off of we were very clear that we didn't want to have a reason why we like a character be because of another character, but I like what you said that it was the interaction between Simon and Wilhelm shows us a side of Wilhelm that we didn't see without that interaction. And so I think the side of Wilhelm that is brought out in those interactions is something that's very special.
Yeah.
It's the first time he's like lighthearted, and you can tell that he's still like, I'm thinking of the lunch scene. You can tell that he's still like really trying to think about his words and what he's going to say, but it's the first time that feels lighthearted.
Yeah.
And happy.
Yeah.
He looks happy.
Yes.
And I love happy Wilhelm.
Exactly. Like I said, like by the point in the episode when you start seeing him actually interacting with Simon and seeing joy on his face, you're like, yes, more of this, please. How do we get more of this? Like, I will do whatever
can we please?
I will do whatever it takes to get more of this.
Can we get 6 episodes of just this?
Yeah.
Lisa?
Unfortunately, the season is
they're already shooting season 3.
Yeah, exactly. And then also, we're 2 queer people, so
we are.
I just want to acknowledge that. I mean, part of our bias about this show, and with like loving Wilhelm and Simon so much, and especially like just Wilhelm. And like Wilhelm specifically, because that relates to this episode, like they are queer, so we must stand. Like it's kind of that. Like I feel like for me, oftentimes, and I'm not exaggerating too much to say that like queer characters do kind of have to do more than straight characters for me to actually make me dislike them.
Yeah. I feel like, I'm with you. And maybe this is me being problematic.
Yeah.
And if it is, I'll fully accept that.
Definitely. I think we both mentioned, like, we kind of have had various moments talking about various things relating to the show, where we turn to each other being like, is this going to make us problematic? And we're like, you know what? We're going to own it. So, but like, Wilhelm, I do want to address calling Wilhelm a queer character. Because Wilhelm does not appear to, as in this episode, know what he is feeling. But I think that makes the dramatic irony of the audience knowing pretty accurately what he's feeling all the better.
Yeah.
Because, like, for those who aren't familiar with dramatic irony, it's where the audience knows more than the characters do. And so in the case of Wilhelm, like, we know what he feels more than he does. And so we sort of are anticipating when Villa is going to figure it out too. Which I'm actually going to propose is the reason for the final moment of the episode is what it is. Because I think that is the moment. That
where he realizes, oh shit.
That some part of him realizes what he's actually feeling and what this is.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I think that's the reason why it's the perfect cutoff point. Like, that's kind of the point you needed to get him to in order to make any future episodes make sense.
Yeah. I fully agree with you there.
There are amount of remaining little details that have been discussed so much in previous episodes. So we won't get into them here. But Margaret, do you have any final plot-related Wilhelm thoughts before we kind of finalize this out?
Honestly, I think we've covered everything that I had.
Yeah. That's kind of the benefit of having talked about this show already for like 6 hours or like in other podcasts. Like, we have kind of exhausted or are approaching exhausting everything there is to say about Wilhelm in the first episode of season 1. Which was the goal. That was the goal. Painstaking dissections, folks. But
we succeeded.
Yes. But Margaret, I'm going to propose to you my finalized thoughts on why we have to stand Wilhelm in this episode, and you add on
Let's have it.
What you think if I've missed anything.
All right, let's have it.
I love Wilhelm because he is a relatably anxious queer boy who doesn't even know he's queer, trapped in a situation no one can properly function in, but one he in particular cannot stand. I see enough of his pain and the potential path towards his future happiness, and want that for him more than I currently want a relationship for myself.
You didn't have to be so relatable right there. That was bold.
Yeah. I remember watching this episode, getting to the end, and being insatiable for more, needing to know whether or not Wilhelm can break free of the emotional prison we have found him in.
Mm-hmm.
And for that reason, I believe we have no choice but to stand Wilhelm in this episode.
That was really good. My rationale for standing Simon in the next episode is not going to be that eloquent.
It's all good. If I have to keep repeating it until it's no longer true, because eventually I'm going to have to say I'm not an English major, it's that I have a bachelor's in English, which actually will be quite soon. We haven't mentioned this on the podcast yet, but both Margaret and I are seniors in college, so...
Yeah, we're graduating in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
When we're recording this.
As of time of recording, we are graduating in 3 weeks. So very soon, I will have to find a different catchphrase than, because I'm an English major, I'll have to find a more eloquent way of putting it.
Is it a BS in English or a BA in English?
It is a Bachelor of Arts in English. BA.
I was going to say, you could be like, I got an English BS, but that doesn't really work if it's a BA.
Yes. Yeah. So basically what I was saying, where I was going with that
tangent.
is that well, yeah, but basically where I was going with that, as an English major, I have some pretty good practice at conclusions. and wrapping up my ideas in a succinct manner after I've vomited them all out in more specific points of evidence. So what I'm saying is, taking notes for this podcast, I basically almost have a degree in it.
And that's why your notes always look so much better than mine.
Yeah. No, that was okay. That was actually a rude way of saying that. But I'm just I just need a greater level of organization, because this is largely how I take notes for like reading literature and stuff for class. But yeah.
No, fair enough.
Yeah.
I'm just a mess of a human being.
So, Margaret, before we close out, is there anything that you feel? Is there any reason that I missed as to why you like Wilhelm that I didn't talk about? That was kind of a roundabout way of saying that, but yeah.
No, I don't think so. I think you covered it. He's just a relatable teenager trying to like do his best in this suffocating situation that we find him in.
Yeah. That's something that I really think we're going to emphasize with this podcast moving forward. Guys, Wilhelm is trying his best. So, with that, thank you for listening. If you'd like to keep up to date with when we release new episodes and other pod-related announcements, you can check out our Instagram at People Don't Talk About. Our next episode will be another character standing, where we'll celebrate all things Simon in Season 1, Episode 1. So stay tuned. And with that, all that's left to say is, let's start a revolution, baby.